Next to Sudan, where fighting continues in spite of a second declared ceasefire agreement. Millions of people have been trapped inside their homes since the violence broke out almost a week ago between warring military groups. The two rival generals had apparently agreed to temporarily halt the fighting so humanitarian aid could get to those who need it, but sporadic fighting continued across the country. We get the latest from our regional correspondent, Bastien Renouil, who's following developments from Nairobi.
The fighting continues this morning, according to my sources on the ground. They say that they can still hear explosions, gunshots in Khartoum, that they can still see warplanes, helicopters bombing several parts of the city that they believe are currently controlled by the rapid support forces. But as you know, it's very difficult to know exactly what's happening on the ground because journalists do not have access to clashes areas, and it's impossible to trust both the RSF and the army's communiques because they're publishing conflicting information. So we don't know for sure who is holding which part of the city, who is in control of which institution. For now, it's impossible to say. That's for Khartoum. Let's speak about the city of Meroe now, 200 kilometers north of the capital. It's a very important city because it hosts a military air base, and it was retaken yesterday by the army. It's a big win for them. And finally, let's mention the situation in the Darfur war-torn region. There's been a conflict in this region since 2003, and now, according to civilians living in El Fashir and Niala, the two main cities of this region, the fighting are raging inside the city centers. In El Fashir, it seems that it's getting closer and closer to refugee camps, home of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. So they're all afraid of what's going to happen during the next hours.
And that's our regional correspondent, Bastien Renouil, reporting. Meanwhile, there are fears that the violence in Sudan could spill over into neighboring countries. 5 of the 7 nations that border Sudan are caught up in their own armed conflicts. We get more on that part of the story from Yinka Oyatade.
Since fighting erupted in Khartoum, the exodus of those fleeing violence in Sudan has been endless. Scared of being caught in the crossfire, these civilians are not only turning their backs on their homes, but the country altogether, raising fears of a potential refugee crisis. It's one that neighboring countries like Ethiopia will have to bear the brunt of. The Horn of Africa's most populous nation is already host to nearly 1 million refugees, many of whom are from Sudan. A migration crisis could upend security in the fragile region. 5 out of the 7 countries that border Sudan are grappling with armed conflicts. Along with a looming refugee crisis, some worry the fighting may serve as inspiration to other armies in the region. It's a risk this expert says neighboring countries are aware of.
Some Arab and foreign states may not care about what is happening in Sudan, but most, if not all, do not want this conflict to continue, because it's in contrast with the changes happening in the Arab region.
In a bid to bring peace back to Sudan, the presidents of South Sudan, Kenya and Djibouti say they want to meet with the rival forces. They fear that as the conflict deepens, foreign powers will want to intervene, as is the case in Libya, where several global and regional players are vying for influence. A scenario the African Union wants to avoid at all costs.